looks like we got a good group of people. All of you are here, so that's what matters overall. Welcome to Friday afternoon. This is the last session of the day, the last Tech Talk webinar. My name is Mike Keitzer. I'm an instructor here with Sunset Learning. Been around here for a long time. They tell me today is 5/29/2020. Seems good. After this session, about an hour long, I'm on vacation for a week, so I'm pretty happy about that. This is the last thing I have to do today. Seems good. Talked about adding a new site to PCCE. Some of you, I can tell out there, have been around since this morning's discussion. This morning's discussion, we went over some security certificate specific commands, the key tool command. We did some certificate work on your VOS servers, call manager, VVBs, CUIC, live data, IDS servers. It's going to come into play in this particular adventure as well, some certificate work. This today about noon, we went over how to add really packaged to, or how to get packaged basically configured after we installed some CCE software. Did that to produce ultimately this thing called the SPOG. And this afternoon's discussion, about an hour long, probably a little less than that, not as involved in setting up all of PCCE, is adding a new site to PCCE via the SPOG. So now we've got the SPOG working as the theory, but we need to grow the environment and add a new site to the SPOG. So as always, if you have questions along the way, please ask them. If you've got good stuff to add or real world experience, please throw that in there. We like to hear that. My experience thus far with packaged anyway has been only in getting the lab to work for a whole bunch of people. So there's a whole lot of servers I've got to maintain. And I guess they got to make you all happy given a week, but they only have to stay up and running for about a week. So that's different than the real world. You are the target audience. And basically what's your goal today? Hopefully successful steps with adding or with allowing you to add a new site to the packaged environment is what our goal is. So we'll cover log files for shooting trouble. That's actually where we'll start off with, is we'll say, oh, I don't know, let's just try to take our existing deployment and add a new site to it. If you probably just take that approach, likely it's not going to work. So fine, where would you go to look at log files, see where trouble's brewing? And as we pretty much touted in the last two sessions anyway, majority of what you're going to be doing is likely some security certificate work to make sure that stuff's working as advertised. We'll then run through the remote site wizard. The remote site wizard is actually a wizard we use within the SPOG itself. Talk about some limitations of remote sites, how many sites are supported. And at the end, just, I don't know, I had a couple of slides that were kind of interesting along the way that I ran into as a troubleshooting problem. And as with most problems, immediately I kind of went, what the? And then a little deeping, that, you know what I'm trying to say here. Digging deeper is what I'm trying to say. Found out problem was fairly obvious, but we'll see how you deal with the problem scenario. And Q&A as well after that. So let me know if you have questions. Probably one thing I should back up and maybe throw out as a discussion here would be along the lines of, why do I want to add another remote site to my PCCE environment? Why is that? Anybody got any thoughts about that? What's involved with a remote site?
How about an acquisition?
Say that again, Bill in Wisconsin.
Like you merge with another company or you acquire somebody.
Okay, so maybe I've got some other organization elsewhere, or some part of my organization could be a merger acquisition type thing, trying to pick up another group of people elsewhere. That's a fine reason for
or you want to do that. Or you want to keep the data separately completely. Maybe within the organization itself, if you have a different business unit, that may be one of the reasons.
Okay, that's fair, right? different lines of business. Now, I guess technically part of that answer in the packaged environment could be, well, we might use departments to help us out to do that, which might help us to logically separate things. But if we combine the two of those together and say maybe based on sheer size or physical location of things, or even politics, might be a good reason to add another site. And so one of the maybe kind of chief considerations and easier things to see in regard to this site is basically the discussion around this looking thing. When I label it, you'll say, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. So you got one of these, a P, and you got some S's, pubs and subs. So here I'm talking about CUCM. And so this other site that we're going to talk about is maybe you could think about adding another site as far as, oh, I got a whole separate cluster that I need to add to the whole configuration. That could qualify for another site. And that's really a separate cluster than maybe the other cluster of pubs and subs that you're already using in existence for PCCE. Or let's call it the main site. The one we just installed earlier today. It's talking to this cluster. This other remote site needs to talk to this other cluster. That's one scenario of totally separate clusters. What we'll also show you is that maybe it's not even a separate cluster. Maybe what you need is this other site to talk to this existing cluster. And we've been doing that for quite some time anyway. In the UCCE world, we had a fixed number of agents, to call it 2,000 most recently. And we had a system that could support more than 2,000. Well, how was that? You had another pair of PGs and another pair of call manager PGs either talk to the same cluster or it talked to a different cluster. And that from an ICM's perspective, looked like a brand new PBX over there, whole different cluster. And it was incumbent upon you, the administrator, to kind of do your job with things like call manager groups in this scenario to make sure that some of your JTAPI users were over here, some of your JTAPI users were over here, and that these clusters were kind of aligned PG-wise to the right systems. And what you're going to find is that the SPOG over here, when you add a site, it takes care of that for you. And as a matter of fact, it somewhat mandates that for you. As a matter of fact, one scenario I'll kind of show you as we go through here when we get to that point is the fact that, I was trying to use the same cluster I had built, but ran into some interesting issues that came up with call manager that I'll discuss with you, trying to use the same cluster. So I don't know if that's hopefully helpful. Anybody else have any other good, crazy issues for sites, politics, physical locations, size? I don't know.
So PCCE supports the global deployment model now. So if you have, if you have an Asia location, everything else is based in US or North America, and then you have an Asia location, you'd more than likely stand up the UC cluster, the UCM cluster, right. Separate PGs, even, separate call ingress for CVPs.
Sure.
And VBBs.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? So Asia Pac over here and US over here, right? Certainly won't want to have all those, probably have separate clusters over there for sure. More than likely, just because of some round trip timers and whatnot. So that totally makes sense. Good stuff. All right. Fair enough. So we're all cool with why we might want to have to do this. Might want to have to. That's good English. So I'm in the SPOG. I'm in the infrastructure settings card of the SPOG. Remember, all those boxes in the back end are called cards. And I'm in the inventory piece of that card. And I'm clicking on this little plus sign up here. Now you got to be a little bit careful. There's a plus sign up top under right next to the main site, which we just were talking about. The main site already exists. It's already got simplex, duplex installation. Trying to add a new remote site. If you scroll down far enough, there's also another add some other devices down below. But what that is literally adding other types of components to the main site. things like VBBs or CVP reporting servers or ECE web servers or data servers, various types of things. So make sure you're clicking on the right plus sign to add the remote site. And you'll notice here that I'm starting off when I'm adding a remote site with kind of a wizard of sorts, and based on what I'm going to select in the first screen is going to somewhat drive what subsequent items I'm going to see along the way within this wizard. I'm adding a remote site. I'm giving my remote site a name. There's a couple of requirements within the system. You can't use, something like, I forget exactly what the requirements are, but can't use too plain of a name. So I've got a site I start off with here named new site 1. And I don't really know what I'm doing here. Let's just add a new site. Notice it's asking me for a site A PG host name and IP address, and a site B PG and host name and IP address. And you don't know this, but I kind of started off here with using actually, trying to kind of do a simplex thing and thought, well, I wonder why I can't do a simplex thing. And as it turns out, at least in a lab-only environment, because the lab-only environment is the only place you can do a simplex option, is that if your main site over here is simplex, your remote site could be simplex, and all you would see is site A information. If, however, your main site was already set up as duplex, it forces the hand down here of making you configure basically a duplex remote site is what it does. So kind of learned that the hard way a little bit, but it all made sense ultimately in the end. So I said, all right, I'll play the game and take my simplex servers and kind of make them look like they're duplexed, and off we go. So had a simplex plus a simplex. Hey, 2 simplex seems like a duplex. There's a story behind this, by the way. So I clicked also at the bottom of this page. We'd want to note that we're specifying, because we're really adding to this remote site a PG, a CCE PG. It probably wants to know what kind of CCE PG we have going on. Do we have just agent functioning out there, or are we going to have some separate CVP servers, as we just heard in that discussion previously about stuff in Asia Pac probably has its own set of CVP servers. So probably so. And maybe we're doing multi-channel. Now I wasn't doing multi-channel in this case. I have ECE set up on the main site, but not here in the remote site. So let's just try this initially. And based on, again, what I'm selecting here, the next screen I see is going to, determine what comes next. But of course, what I had right after hit next was some kind of error condition that occurred. And as we mentioned along the way, at least in the last session for the PCCE installation, you can't go wrong with looking at some log files as long as you know which log files to look at. And if you've got problems with any of the PCCE wizardry, what I'm looking at here is the primary DAW. I might be on some other server with this web page up and running, because that's how this, I guess, web interface works. It's a web page. But where would I go to look at log files? Well, go to your primary DAW. That primary DAW, and wherever ICM is installed to, under the Tomcat logs folder, is where you're going to find, if you sort by date, more than likely the CCBU log file and its corresponding error log file goes hand in hand with it. And as long as you're pretty decent at noting what time it is and looking through maybe some cryptic information and understanding things, you'll have a better handle on making this work. In this particular event, if you remember, which you probably don't, one of the first servers on the previous screen was my PG. And this other server over here by IP address, this is my primary DAW. My primary DAW had some kind of an exception error, right? REST API caught an error. Somewhere else I have to find, something about unable to find a valid certification path to the requested target. Now, I worked pretty hard to scrunch all that stuff into one nice screen that you can kind of easily see. It might be a little less easy than that, but likely without turning up a bunch of debugging, whatever misery you're causing the system is probably out there, more than likely. And again, I think I threatened earlier that I actually found more seemingly information in actually the CCBU log file than the error log file. The error confirmed I had an error. Didn't exactly seem to tell me all of the specific cool stuff, as did the CCBU log file, which is date timestamp. Okay, fair enough. So we have some problems. Looks like we didn't do our certificate work, which if you were paying attention to the 2 sessions this morning, you already know we had to do some of that stuff. So as we talked about this morning, really one of the things that I've realized I've forgotten in here is forgot to tell you about adding the security certificate stuff to the VOS servers, but if you refer to either the previous sessions, that would be in there. So that still holds true. For some reason, I left that screenshot out. But here we've jumped ahead and we've said, okay, for this new site PG, here's the first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to go to the site PG, just like we had to do on the DAW and the other devices as well, and generate a new key pair for this specific alias. This alias is this server. So exactly like we did with our VOS servers, making sure that we're getting the correct really X509 information in our certificate request. So we're back at our command line prompt in the correct folder in the lib security folder where our CA Certs file exists. We're using that key tool command that we went over this morning in a session in case you missed it, be recorded for you. And we're trying to generate a key pair, or really generate a certificate cert request with the corresponding information we need to know about, like what's the alias, this is my host name, what's my key size, what's my key algorithm, RSA, we just follow directions there. Important, as we've been mentioning along the way when it comes up and asks you for your first and last name, imperative here, we put our FQDN in there. FQDNs are how these systems stare and compare and make sure they're talking the right system. So you want to make sure your FQDN is correctly in there. After that, whatever you put in there normally for your CA stuff is what you fill in. And after I hit enter along the way, confirm my information, tells me that it's generated a key pair and self-signed certificate, valid for 90 days. So let's go make that thing valid for longer 90 days by running another command to export that fine key that I just generated. Insert. Going to use the key tool command using the cert request command line switch for this alias that we generated for. Let's take that alias file and output that to another file in some location called whatever, in this case, .csr, certificate cert request. We're doing this all on behalf of that key store CA Certs. That gives us a file out here that if we open up that with Notepad, again, looks like a bunch of gibberish, what it looks like. Looks like some kid went to town on a keyboard. All right, fine. But we can take that gibberish. We can log on to our CA server, be that private or some public CA server, and somewhere along the way, take all that stuff, paste it into the certificate request window, hit submit. What should come back either immediately or maybe a couple of days downstream is somebody tells me it's all right to go out there and download your certificate. And we've downloaded our certificate now as a CER file, a certificate file, into some shared location. That's cool. We took our certificate request from our ICMPG, submitted to the CA server. The CA server gave us a signed copy of that request. While we're there, we probably need to download the certificate from the CA server. We might already have that from a previous adventure. So we're back now on our ICMPG, going to import the CA certificate and the CA signed certificate for our previous request. So doing 2 import processes, import 1 and import 2. Import 1 is importing as an alias root the certificate authorities certificate into our CA Certs key store. The -V is just verbose output for what it's going on, right? It asks if you want to trust the certificate. We surely do. Off it goes. Second import, we're importing now our signed certificate, importing, this is our host machine that we're taking our request that was valid for 90 days. Now it's come back, it's valid for 2 years or 6 years or some amount of time. And that file that we copied was this file over here. So let's try to import that alias from that file name into our CA Certs key store. Ask you for the password. Remember the password here for all of your ICM servers, lowercase, change it. lowercase is the password in all of your ICM servers. Great. Got 2 certificates imported. Notice, just like we told you with the VOS servers, going to have to restart Apache Tomcat. You do that via service control. If you, not that you'd probably be logging on, actually this is kind of a misplaced slide because this was for the DAW. We're not on a DAW, we're on a PG, so just forget you even saw this slide right here, people. How's that sound? Sounds good. As it turns out, apparently I didn't forget all about those VOS servers because here's a screenshot right here. I thought I forgot about them. But here's a generate, sign, and apply all your CA certs for Finesse. Included with that would really be whatever other servers are applicable. In my case, Call Manager wasn't applicable because I was trying to join the same cluster that I already had enough certs for all the servers in the cluster, which was more than I needed here. So I didn't have to redo any work in Call Manager. I did, however, for my new Finesse cluster of 2 servers. Notice over here, 2 servers. I had to log into the CM platform page, go out there and generate that certificate signing request. Basically the same thing for these 2 hosts. There's my algorithm and key length and my purpose, and then turn around and import 2 certificates. One is the CA certificate as a Tomcat Trust certificate. That's from my CA server. This certificate is a Tomcat cert. That's my signed certificate from here. But I went through the same process. So somewhere in the middle was that CA server as well. So this is wash, rinse, repeat repetitively. Your CVP certs, you're going to need from CVP the diagnostic portal certs from those CVP servers. Why is that? Well, because the SPOG, CCE, whatever you want to call it out there, is basically using the diagnostic portal to go out there and inventory those servers, make sure they're doing what they're doing, make sure we get enough ports, and whatever changes you're making, it's actually having to go out there and push information to it. Remember that part of what the SPOG's function is the ops console that we formerly used to use to push configuration changes out to our CVP servers. So we're using Foxfire 5000 up here to go out to this URL, basically all of our CVP servers for this site. I had 2 of them, remember. Actually, you don't know that yet, but I have 2 of them for this adventure. And in this URL, I'm expecting to get some kind of certificate warning, which we're trying to cure. Let's go out and view that certificate. Let's download that certificate as a PIM file. And now we got a PIM file over here. Well, great. We've done that for all of our CVP servers. Let's go back to our DAW. Remember, our DAW is trying to talk to all these servers out there. Not really the PG. The DAW is trying to coordinate all these adventures. So I'm going back to DAW1, my primary DAW, and importing the, let's call it the new CVP certs. We already did this once for the other CVP servers at the main site. Now we're adding the new CVP servers from the new site here to the DAW1. So that's a simple key tool import. Got to specify the file that we just downloaded. That was that PIM file we got from Firefox. There's the alias, that's that server name, and this is the key store we're trying to import that into. Key store password again is change it. So we've sucked that file in there. You want to trust that certificate? Yes. Geez, probably got to restart Tomcat again. All right, let's add a remote site, take 2. See what happens now. Change of pace here a little bit. I showed you the duplex previously. Now what I'm kind of changing to is a simplex installation. I'll show you where applicable the simplex versus duplex. I'm kind of doing 2 of each things. At this point in time, what had actually happened is the CCE installation demo licensing was good for 90 days. Somewhere before that, my boss had talked me into using some demo SQL 2017 licensing because we didn't have all of our right licensing yet. So I used demo SQL 2017 licensing. Good for 180 days. Literally the same week they both expired and then nothing worked. So I blew away the duplexed installation, reverted back to snapshot, had to get real version of SQL, and ended up building a simplex deployment. So this is the reason you're seeing simplex here. You don't care about all this stuff. Just continue on, Mike, is what they're saying. All right. So here we're now adding again a new remote site. Site name, in this case, I've made pod 1. My goal also here was to figure out how many sites I can add. And since I have a simplexed main site, it's allowing me to add a simplex remote site. Notice it's only asking me for side A, PG, hostname / IP address. It's a simplex, right? It's not duplex, it's simplex. Sounds good. Same thing, what do I want to do? I want an agent PG and a VRU PG. Should create for me 2 PGs, I guess, on one box. By the way, this hostname, of course, has to be resolvable, obviously. And looks like I passed through at least that first part. And what I came to next was the next part of the wizard that said, oh, okay, you want agent stuff and CVP stuff. We're probably from here forward going to ask you about some agentish stuff and probably some CVP stuff. Seems good. And what I've actually got going on in this screen is 2 different screenshots. One screenshot over here where I'm showing you that if I was doing a simplexed remote site, it'd only ask me for a publisher and 1 subscriber because it understands I'm doing simplex stuff. But if I'm doing duplexed, what I'm gonna need is, of course, a side A call manager server and a side B call manager server. Now, here's what I kind of thought initially. I thought initially I had 3 servers in the call manager cluster, pub and 2 subs. Let's call them sub 1 and sub 2. And I thought, well, I don't know if, should be able to cheat, right? Should be able to add a new remote site and just, even though I've got sub 1 and sub 2 kind of being used in the main site, I can see them in the list over here, sub 1 and sub 2, but darn if it wouldn't allow me to select them and continue on. I was like, what the heck? Looked through all kinds of stuff, and I'd seen some JTAPI error messages as well over on the main site, and I kind of wonder if they're the same thing. Anyway, went off in a bunch of tangents, only to later realize that, you know what? It's enforcing right here. It's enforcing for me basically call manager grouping functionality. If I've got sub 1 and sub 2 used in a duplexed fashion in my main site, there's no way it's going to allow me to use sub 1 and sub 2 in a remote site. No. I'm going to have to build sub 3 and sub 4. So for my 1 duplexed main site plus a remote site, I ended up having to have 5 call manager servers, 1 pub for, let's call it, both main and the remote site, but each site had to have the equivalent number of servers. That's one of the reasons I went to simplex, is I said, well, I got 5 servers. Let me see how many sites I can build. So notice in the simplex, I'm only adding, in this case, 1 of the subscribers over there. Hopefully that makes some sense. Anyway, let me continue forth. Looks like we're good with call manager. Since we had all of our certificate stuff working, it allowed me to bypass that. I'd done all my Finesse certificate work. Since I'm only showing a simplexed here, it only asked me for 1 host name IP address for my Finesse server. If I was duplexed, of course, it would ask me for 2 of them. And it asks me down below, mostly just like the inventory file did for initial PCCE wizard, it's asking me for the Finesse administration username. So this is my application username, not my platform username. Password, whatever the doggone password is. Hit next, keep going. Seems like we're getting closer here. Fill in the CVP information. Now again, with CVP, if you were duplexed, you'd have more than 1 CVP server, or this might be different based on your main site configuration. In this case, I only had a simplexed installation, so only 1 CVP server, and I said I wanted to do some VRU stuff. So there's the host name of that server. Username and password is just the Windows username and password on that server. And Next screen says, we're making progress. 1 of 18 steps. Again, that 1 of 18 steps, that mileage varies right there based on simplexed or duplexed functionality. Says it's going to take about 30 minutes, but hang out, watch the paint dry, see what happens. 18 steps is actually for duplex side A and side B. You'll notice actually in the simplexed version we're looking at here, it completed 12 of 12 steps. If you look closely, it was only a bunch of side A stuff, right? So key things here is it involved a remote site PG. It involved a remote site call manager and CVP set of servers, if you've selected those checkboxes, maybe some other media routing stuff. It involved, for sure, since there was call manager involved, another set of Finesse servers had to be configured. But what it didn't necessarily involve was any AEWs. AEWs are, you might say kind of agnostic to that site. Those would be added as other types of servers back in the main SPOG. Nothing, at least in this deployment model, having to do with other AEWs. Now, if you get into some of the larger deployment models, your mileage, of course, may vary there. I can't replicate that in the lab environment. So it looks like we got a successful site added to the system. You would probably also want to know how many sites can I add total. So in the lab environment, looks like I can add 3 sites total. Count them pod 1, pod 2, and pod 3. And in a production environment, it says 5 sites total. Now, if you do some fancy math here, as it works out, the math actually works correctly, because I think one of the deployment models we saw for PCCE, if I'm not mistaken, said something about 12,000 agents. And remember, we've always known that it's not really a limitation of call manager as a cluster. It's more or less a limitation of PG pairs. One PG pair can talk to about 2,000 agents out there. So if you take your main site, which we assume could handle about, 2,000 agents, and you add 5 more of those to your main site, now I guess you're up to a total of 6 sites. If each site can handle 2,000 agents, apparently, with what high school education I've got under my belt, that equals about, I think, 12,000 agents. I'm doing my math correctly there. So I guess your lab environment could support what? 2, 4, 6, maybe 8,000 agents. I don't know if you configure 8,000 agents in your lab, but you could. Where that benefits us is when you come back, when students come back for a deployment class, we're trying to figure out how are we going to do a deployment class. I think what we've come to a conclusion of here is that we'll do a deployment of another site. So we'll have a main site built, and when you come back as a student, we're going to have some other sites built. We're limited on 3 sites total, but we're kind of trying to figure out how to elegantly have maybe a couple of instances of PCCE in one big place, and have really 3 instances of PCCE. Each instance can have up to 3 sites. So that kind of gives you 9 students in a class, but we'll work that out. If you come up with any creative thoughts on that, we'd be all ears to consider some options there. So there you go. The only other, I got 2 more slides here, which are just kind of interesting side effect of something I saw along the way and some behaviors. So I'll run through this 2-slide scenario. I'll ask to see on I won't give you the answer what the problem was. We'll see what you all come up with as a scenario. So somewhere along the way, apparently in step 8 of 18, step 8 of 18 was doing some PG stuff on side A. It came up with an error message and it said, hey, your PG didn't go so well. We tried to create on side A. The address on is not associated with a valid host name in DNS. I don't know what that actually means, which must have matching entries in both forward and reverse lookups zones. Right? Now, if you know the answer, you can shout it out right now, or you can wait a minute. I'll show you slide 2, might help you with your answer. But a couple things to note here. It looks like I'm doing some duplex stuff over here. I guess I got a side A host name, IP address. I guess what I'm showing you here is it seemed like I tried IP and host name along the way. And of interest as well, and the reason you want to stick around the console when you're running these wizards, the SPOG wizard and this wizard, is that if something goes awry, there's a limited time where you get an ability to say, okay, I screwed up. Let me go back, or whatever the button says at the time. And what that does for you is it reverts your configuration. Seems to me like if you wait a while, what's going to happen is the SPOG is going to log you out. And then when you log back in, I don't really know what happened. There's some wacky things that involved some reboots along the way because I got distracted. So you might stick it out and save yourself some heartache along the way. Slide 2, though, was again making use of that logs folder under the Tomcat directory on the ICM primary DAW. And it looked like I had some error messages that showed up in the log file in one spot. Another spot, I got some other messages that maybe were indicative of what my problem was. So whoever comes up with the correct answer to the problem is going to get, hey, how about 20% off of SLI's most popular instructor-led UCC courses? Just use this promo code UCCETTT by June 30th, and you will be the winner here. So go back over here to this slide. Anybody got any thoughts on what my problem was that was more obvious after the fact? Somebody's got to have an answer. Skippy better have an answer. You're telling me you're on mute. Someone. No one? Anyone? Bueller? Anybody got a guess?
Maybe you need a host file entry or DNS entry.
Okay, well, all right, go with that. Well, let's say, you know, this is a Windows server, right? So Windows servers put DNS entries in there. I think when you join them to the domain, right? Playing the devil's advocate. And, you know, the other next most obvious thing might be to say, well, if you go with just the initial error message here, which I went with initially, I said, oh man, did I screw up? Do I not have a reverse lookup zone? How would I have configured DNS without reverse lookup in there? Geez, that'd be bad on my part. No, I went back there and sure enough, there's reverse lookup zone. So it was all in there. The addresses were in there. That was not the problem. But this error message here gave more information away, provided, I guess, you are a UCCE person and you think about what we're really trying to do here is we've got a duplexed environment that I'm looking at on this page. And these servers over here are two PGs, right? Side A and side B, side A and side B, PGs. So go back with your host name thought. What's wrong?
Put in the A side into the B side.
Say that again.
Put the A side host name into the B side fields.
For what
Could you
purpose would
simplex
I do that generally?
Just so it can do a lookup, so it thinks there's something out there.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with what you're thinking there.
You use the same host name and IP since that was a simplex.
No, they're different hosts, right? They're definitely different hosts. They're different IP addresses. But
Oh, okay. You didn't do a simplex.
no, this is duplex in this case, right?
My oversight, sorry.
You'll groan when I say this, but what I was missing was a private network, people. All right. Remember, I built them as simplex devices, but it got caught up in the whole, oh, I got to actually have duplex servers. So in the simplex model, you don't really have to have a private network, doesn't even care about that. But doing duplex, sure enough, as you would want to have, and it verifies you do in fact have one of those things. I had to go out there and add a new network to my VM and give it some IP addresses, and yeah, put in resolvable host names for that private network that matched the IPs in DNS. So it was a 100% failure on my part that I went, well, of course it would check for that. That's what it's supposed to be doing. So, but it forced the hand on it. So that was all that was happening there. And I guess the reason I point this out is, again, the cryptic messages certainly make a lot more sense maybe after the fact than they do going in. But look through those log files. They can certainly help you to track what's going on or what's happening out there. Another good example is I mentioned last session about the DAW2 needing a 700 gig hard drive. The log file didn't tell me I needed a 700 gig hard drive. The log file told me I needed some really long number in megabytes hard drive, which was, I don't know, like 9 numbers or something crazy like that. And I was thinking, what does that actually equate to? Let me do the math on that. So, you know, they're log files are log files, but your error message might be in there somewhere. So that, people, is what's involved with adding a site to your PCCE deployment. We appreciate your time. Does anybody have any questions about that or clarification or interesting stories? Nothing. We must have just answered everything you needed to know about that. But, well, know that we are working on some new classes with and for Cisco. All the new classes are all PCCE based. A couple of them are completed. We already have kind of a beginning admin course. I don't know if that's officially yet on the schedule, but a couple other courses revolving some deployment and reporting, troubleshooting, et cetera, et cetera. So keep it on our website and hopefully, you know, send some customers our direction and let us know how we can help you better serve the training world. So, and thanks for coming today. Appreciate it.